Hi guys, Kabi from UiPath Hacks here. Today we will look at two very similar activities, the Excel read range and the Workbook read range. We will look at the similarities as well as at the differences and, more important, in which context we should use each of them. Reading data from Excel is very common. It is literally used in any production-ready automation, at least for reading some data out of a config Excel file. So let's take a closer look at the two activities to understand them better. We will start with the read range activity, or the Excel read range. This activity must sit under an Excel application scope. Studio will show an error if we overlook this aspect, and it makes sense because this activity does not have a workbook path parameter, so it needs to inherit one from the parent activity. And while we are talking about parameters, we have the usual range and sheet name parameters, as well as an output data table parameter. And as options, we have the add headers tick, which makes sure the first row in the Excel file will be interpreted as a data table column names. If we do not set this tick, then the output data table will have empty column names. And we have here a dummy Excel file with 3 columns. I was out of inspiration, so I just named them column 1 to 3, and then name, age, and city from 1 all the way to over 10,000 lines. We will see why so many. So this is our dummy file, 3 columns, many lines. The second option besides the add headers is the preserve format tick. And this attempts to understand and preserve the data types of the Excel columns, like, for example, currency, numbers, or date formats, and set them in the resulting data table. However, this affects speed as it reads the range cell by cell rather than in bulk for the whole column. The use filter option, the last one here, applies the filters in Excel and reads only the rows which are filtered. So if we would filter, for example, here 2, 2, 2, 2, we should get one row which meets this criteria. And if we save the Excel with this filter, we will see that it only returns one line. So we can run this now. I have here the workbook read range as well. I will comment it for now. So we have the Excel application scope with the path to our file. Then we have the read range activity. We can write once without the use filter tick, although we have set the filter already here. And then we output the data table, our data table, to a string basically, and then we are going to log this string as a message. So let's run this. And as expected, we have our data table here with lots of rows. After the row number 400 something, it doesn't display anymore because it's too long. And that's the output. Now let's do the same with ticking this use filter option here. And we see that we only get back one row instead of the more than 10,000 rows. So this is how it works, how the options work here. Let's put it back. Now let's comment this section and go to the workbook read range. So here we see that we have almost the same properties with two differences. We have a workbook path as a property because we don't have any parent activity for this. And we have one difference in the options as well. The use filter option is missing, so we can't use filters from the Excel file, but we have an additional one, which is password. So this allows us to work with password protected workbooks as well. All right, we can even leave the filter in. That should be fine. Let's run this. And we get again the whole data table with all the rows here. All right, so we have seen the similarities and some of the obvious differences. Now let's look at some more subtle differences. If we execute the two activities one at a time, we observe that in the case of the Excel read range activity, the first one, Excel is not opened, while in the case of the workbook read range activity, we might see the Excel window flashing briefly, especially if the activity takes more time. In our case, it was run quite quickly, in 1 second or less. But if the file is bigger, we might see the Excel window flash briefly and then disappear again, because the workbook read range activity will open Excel. But where we see really this difference is if we have the Excel file open while we run our automation. So let's keep Excel open and let's run the first Excel read range activity. Right, so this is uncommented, this is commented. And even though Excel is open, we should have no problem running this. We've run it, we got the result here, no error. But if we now keep still Excel open, so it's opened, and we run the second activity, the workbook read range activity, then we will get an exception, an input-output exception, because the file is being used by another process. So the workbook read range activity cannot work with the file if the file is opened by another process. And this is quite a big difference. And we will talk later about how we can use this to our advantage. All right. Now, a second interesting point is to look at speed. Sometimes due to large volumes or number of iterations, saving even 1 second per item would result in a huge time saving. So I've increased the size of the Excel file, and let's see which of the two activities perform faster. We are getting timestamps before and after each read range. So I've prepared this already here to go faster. We have a date start now when we start the stopwatch. And we have here 3 activities. I'm stopping basically the time, or taking a snapshot of the time after the activity has finished, the read range, again now. And then I have a time stamp, and I'm subtracting the start from the end, and then I'm logging this here in milliseconds. So if we look at the variables, we have date start and date end being date time variables, and we have the time span, the TS, the time elapsed. This is a time span variable type, and this is basically how we calculate it. We take the date end, then dot, subtract date start. This gets basically the time span. And then when we are displaying this, we are saying time elapsed, the time span variable, then dot milliseconds, and then dot to string. And this should show us what is the difference in milliseconds, because the difference is quite small between the end and the start times, and that's basically how long the read range activity took. And we are doing the exact same thing here as well for the workbook read range. So I will just uncomment these activities, 7 activities here, and then we can run the two and compare the running times. All right, so we can run both activities now at the same time. I will just comment the display of the table because that's really taking a lot of space here. And let's run now. So we have seen the Excel file has flashed very quickly. That's from the workbook read range activity. And we have here our times. So it took 80 milliseconds for the Excel read range activity for the first one. It took 569 milliseconds for the workbook read range activity. So it's about 7 times faster. So the Excel read range activity was about 7 times faster than the workbook one. We can run again just to see how long it takes now. Might be a small difference. So we have 73 seconds as opposed to 456. So again, we have around 6 to 7 times difference in the time it took. So you can see that the Excel read range activity finishes much faster than the workbook read range activity. However, even for an Excel file with more than 10,000 lines, like my dummy Excel file, we are still talking only about 1/3 of a second in total. Another more subtle difference that could make a considerable budget difference is that the Excel read range activity needs Microsoft Excel to be installed on the machine that runs it, while the Workbook Read Range activity does not. And this could be a big one right there in some environments, because we can be talking about some considerable licensing costs. I would say these are the main differences between the two activities. I would conclude that the Excel read range would be preferred when we need any way to do that as part of a larger set of activities within the Excel file, like maybe running also some macros and an Excel application scope is anyway required, or when we need to consider the filters applied to the Excel file, or when speed is critical. It was in our test about 6 to 7 times faster than the workbook activity. And another reason would be we don't need or we don't want to open the Excel file. It can run in background even when the Excel file could be opened by another process. That would be fine for us. Now, the workbook read range activity should be used when we want to make sure the Excel file is already closed and not used by another process when we start reading from it. Otherwise, we want to throw an exception. This could be used as a synchronization or lock feature, or when we need to work with password protected workbooks because we can enter the password here, or when Microsoft Excel is not installed on the client that runs the bot, and also when a few milliseconds don't make a difference and we just want to quickly read some data with just one activity instead of 2 activities. This concludes the comparison of the 2 activities. We have seen their similarities, differences, and more importantly, when does it make sense to use each of them. I hope this video will help you take a more conscious decision next time when you are faced with the option to use one of these 2 activities. I would very much appreciate if you would hit the like button for this video. It will support the channel and make this content available to more users, as well as support my efforts to create more insightful videos for you and the UiPath community. To make sure you will be notified of new content, you can also subscribe to the channel if you did not already do it. Thank you for watching and have a great day.